give a big warm welcome to Adam Corneil.
All right, good evening. I just want to thank Josh and everyone who helped put this on, first of all. I think it's a really important topic to get a big group of people together and talk about changes that a few of us are making, and then hopefully, in the least, it inspires some good conversation, and the best, maybe it inspires some people out here to make some dramatic changes in their lives, or start businesses, or join organizations that can make a big impact. Most of my career and my life is pretty much premised on change, so it's fitting to be speaking about that tonight. So I'll start with a bit of a background about myself. So I grew up wanting to be an architect or an archaeologist. I apparently didn't get off the A's in the career field. And that'll come back to play later on in the talk, but I was obsessed with buildings, the way we build, and history, and really human history. I've been drawing blueprints and looking at buildings since I was 5 years old, and I was always working with my hands, renovating my house with my father. And I flipped my first house with my father at 16, and I've been really in the industry ever since. So I studied philosophy and biological anthropology at university, and that really bred the conservative, the conservation in me, and wanting to make sure that whatever I did in my career, it was going to positively impact the planet. I moved to Vancouver in 2012 from Alberta, so I was a vegetarian green builder in Calgary, and that just didn't really make much sense anymore. So I came to Vancouver, I read about the Greenest City Action Plan, and I knew that this was the place that I needed to be. So I founded Naturally Crafted Contracting, a sustainable contracting company then, and I'll take you through a bit of a journey since then. So just a bit more about me. So I'm an outdoorsman, and this is really where my love for nature comes from, whether it's skiing or hiking or trail running. If I'm not working, then you can pretty much find me in the forest. And I'm a serial entrepreneur, so this is something that was bred into me from a young age, pretty much my whole age, or my whole life that I can remember. And so I was brought up to look for gaps in society, look for where I could make an impact. And so that's what I've done. I knew I was wanting to be in the building industry, so the nature of humans and evolution in general is that everything we have today is going to be better in the future, and so I knew I wanted to make a difference in the construction industry. So this is a quote that was bred into me since I can remember, and that some men see things as they are and ask why. I dream of things that never were and ask why not. So Naturally Crafted was launched in early 2013. It started as a carpentry company, and it evolved into a construction company from there. So we've always been reclaimed wood specialists, starting with taking every stud that we took out of old renovations and walls and building furniture out of them. I transitioned to become a passive house builder, and now I've transitioned to become an unbuilder. So this is just some of the installations and furniture that I started my career here with, and then that evolved over time. We started reclaiming our own wood and deconstructing homes and making our own products out of them. So now I'm going to talk about demolition, because this is what I saw as a builder. I was seeing demolition happening all around me, especially in this city, and it really disgusted me, especially what we were doing in our renovations and our builds. We were salvaging everything we possibly could, and to see the industry around just throw out everything possible because it's quick, it's easy, and it's cheap, it made me want to change not only my career path a bit, but make a difference in this industry. So this is the standard demolition, even a green demolition in Vancouver, which is now mandated by law, because you can see they've stripped the siding off and some of the plaster. So this is your typical building removal. You want to redevelop, bring in the machine. I think the people that made this video probably thought it was the coolest thing they've ever made. This breaks my heart. There's so much good product here that they're just throwing away. So construction, renovation, and demolition It accounts for 27% of all waste in Canada and 35% of greenhouse gases, although, Zipporah, maybe that stat is off after your last presentation. In the Lower Mainland, that accounts for 375,000 tons a year that goes to landfill, and 220,000 tons of that is wood. In Metro Vancouver, there's an average of 3,700 houses a year that are demolished. And last year, there was a total of 10 that were actually deconstructed by us. And if you look at the industrial sector, the amount of buildings that come down, it actually doubles, so it's about 7,000, just in the Lower Mainland. As a reference, I know there's been a lot of big push on banning single-use plastic, which is fantastic. That's a major problem. When you look at how much waste is generated from a single demolition, it's about 50 tons. That's equivalent of 57 million straws, which is actually the amount of straws that all of Canada uses in a day. So a single house deconstructed is the same amount as that statistic. So why do we demolish houses? We do it because, or what's the result? So it results in 50 tons that goes to landfill. We do it because it's fast and it's cheap. But the way that we see it is that it's wasted resources, it's speed over logic, and it's economics over the environment. And the last two, we actually challenge that in our business model, and I'll explain that in a little bit. So the City of Vancouver introduced the Green Demo Bylaw in 2014, which is fantastic. It's a small step forward, and that makes it so any pre-1940 house, now it's pre-1950 house, it has to be recycled 75%, 90% if it has heritage characteristics. But what that did is the industry adapted as they do, and they've greenwashed the term deconstruction, and that's why we've created the company Unbuilders, so we try to separate that we unbuild homes, we don't deconstruct them, because deconstruction isn't actually being done in the correct way in Vancouver. So just like that video I showed you, now you have demolition companies, they strip the drywall and plaster out of houses, and they bring the machine in and they destroy the wood just the same. So it's a baby step forward, and there's a long way to go. And so what the Green Demo Bylaw has done is it's made all this wood go into facilities where they chip it up and they burn it for energy. So it's being captured, so it's waste to energy, which on the hierarchy you can see that's only the second tier. So as I said, it's a step forward. Where we operate is a couple more steps up. And Metro Vancouver, they introduced a bylaw in 2015 across the Lower Mainland, and this actually applies all the way to Vancouver Island, where you cannot dump drywall or plaster at the landfill. And this is actually the single biggest factor that made Unbuilders have a possibility in this market. So Unbuilders, we launched last year, January of 2018. So we were deconstructing for 5 years under the contracting company, but we split it off as its own brand. And we salvage structures by hand. So we take the whole house down by hand, and we salvage everything we possibly can, and anything that's not salvaged goes to different recycling facilities. So we end up going to 5 or 6 different facilities throughout a job. We reduce waste up to 97%. We'll probably get even higher than that as we get more efficient at it. And we have the City of Vancouver's record for that. We donate the materials to charity. We've adapted a donation model. And the reason we do that is to be economically competitive with demolition. So now, if a homeowner wants to deconstruct their home, everything we take down, we donate to Habitat for Humanity, and we get that donation appraised. They get a tax receipt for that donation, and that tax receipt actually brings their cost of demolition, or their cost of deconstruction below demolition. So now you're doing something good for the environment, you're saving money while you're doing it, and you're donating to Habitat for Humanity, which builds affordable housing. So you're hitting your triple bottom line just by hiring us. So this is what a typical deconstruction looks like, which you'll notice is quite different than demolition. So it's reverse engineering. We've already stripped out the inside of the house, the utilities and the drywall and plaster and insulation. So last year we deconstructed 10 full homes, and we did about 10 renovations as well. And that was diverting 500 tons, so 50 tons a house. And we salvaged 50,000 board feet of lumber, and that's another 100 tons, and about 20 tons of fixtures, appliances, and finishes in the home. This year we're on pace to triple that. So the market has spoken, and people are giving us calls, which is great to see. So now I want to talk about the materials. So the obvious ones that we're salvaging: doors, windows, cabinets, appliances, finishes. And so there's lots of reuse stores out there in the world. But the real thing that brought me into this was the lumber. So on average, we salvage about 10 tons of clean lumber per house, about 5,000 board feet. And so that's anything from 2x4s all the way up to the posts and beams in the basement, the shiplap on the outside, which used to be basically the plywood. And this was our first warehouse that we opened in June, which we sadly don't have anymore. We ironically got rent-evicted, and our building is being demolished currently. And this ties in with the history here, and it also ties in with my passions, which is archaeology, as I said, and human evolution. And so when thinking about the foundations of British Columbia and Vancouver, and I've been reading a lot about the history here, the post-colonial history, it's interesting because Vancouver was actually founded by entrepreneurs moving here from all over the world for resource extraction, and Vancouver was created because of the port. It had deep water. The capital was originally going to be Port Moody, but they knew that the port would be at capacity within 10 years. And reading about the history of Vancouver has really made me connect a lot more with this place and why I'm here, why I moved here, just like the pioneers from 130, 140 years ago. So we're not only salvaging materials, this is False Creek back in the day, but we're also salvaging our very short history here. This was Granville Street in the 1890s. And so it used to just be basically a lumber skid, and they'd bring lumber in and bring it down to False Creek and load it on ships and ship it out. And so the old growth lumber, this is why I started Unbuilders. This is what the passion really comes from. So houses built up until the 1970s, even the 2x4s that they're framed with are from old growth trees. So these are the big, beautiful trees that we have very little of. Some of us hike in and try to find them. And that was every single piece of wood that we're recovering today. When Vancouver was incorporated in 1886, the trees were so big and the technology wasn't there yet that it would take them a week to take down a single tree by axe. So other than where the buildings were and where the ports were, they couldn't cut the trees. So it took innovation to get us to the point that we could start felling the trees in our area. A single old growth tree, Douglas fir, can produce up to 12,000 board feet, and we recover about 4,000 to 5,000 board feet per house. So a single tree could produce 2.5 houses. So these are the trees we're recovering, down to every 2x4. This is what our houses are made of. Our old houses, 1970 and earlier. They used to take up the full cart of a train or the entire truck. So as I said, we're salvaging more than materials and houses. We're salvaging our history. And this is the way that we see it. We time-lapse every project that we do. We take lots of pictures because we want to capture that history. And we want to tell the stories of these old houses that are otherwise just being destroyed and thrown into the landfills. It took 1,000 years to grow these trees. Our houses have been standing for 100 years, and it's a shame to just throw that into the waste. So this is our crew. In October, we went out and visited the ancient Cedar Grove in Whistler, and we try to make a habit every 3 to 6 months of getting out into some old growth forest with our crew, because it makes us actually connect with the materials we're handling every day. And it's really important to see what these trees are, just how big and beautiful they are. And it's really great for our crew to have that connection. So the newest evolution in our business, again, this is the theme of change, is we're not going to be contracting moving forward. So I've basically evolved myself out of building for now. And we'll be adapting the business to become a heritage lumber company. So we're without a warehouse at the moment, and we'll be getting a warehouse later in the year. And we'll be selling this in East Vancouver, hopefully, where we were before. And we'll be partnering up with Habitat for Humanity. They're already our partner to try to get a co-location, as well as nonprofit woodshop workers co-op, who we sell all of our lumber to. And they'll be doing a lot of the installations that we no longer will be doing. But we're trying to form this community all wrapped around reclamation and used building materials. So the future for us, for Unbuilders and Heritage Lumber, is we're looking to expand our service in the region, and we'd love to be getting onto Vancouver Island in 2020, as well as the Gulf Islands. Because the waste regulations are the same in those areas, it makes it so our service can easily grow and operate in those areas. And on the building development side, I'm not going to be out of building for my whole life, because it's just the way that I'm wired. So we're going to spend the next several years doing R&D projects. I work with people at BCIT and UBC and doing some R&D on engineered reclaimed products and building buildings that are designed for disassembly. So in the future, will be the unbuilding of buildings will be a lot more straightforward than it is today. And I'll be advocating more for changes in the bylaws. So I already work with the City of Vancouver and some other municipalities locally, and have helped adapt the Green Demo bylaw and spread it farther. So in January, the bylaw now states that any house pre-1910 in Vancouver has to salvage a minimum of 3 tons of lumber. And that's really because we've pushed really hard, and the City of Vancouver is extremely open to that feedback. And they've worked really tightly with the industry, which makes me really happy that I moved here. And we're going to be pushing over the next probably decade to look at salvage subsidies, because this is something that initial bump up in cost, I believe that should be covered by the government to initiate more people doing this service. So for me, some lessons learned along the way is do what you love, for sure, and that breeds passion. Because if you don't do what you love, then you can fail at doing anything. So why fail if you're not doing what you love? Not that I think we're going to fail. Lesson 2 is embrace continual change, the theme of the night. I started as a builder. If you told me 6 years ago that I would be closing my building company to be opening a heritage lumber company and deconstructing houses, I would have told you you're crazy. So you have to be adaptable if you want to make change. And there's going to be lots of bends along the road. And the last one is things take a lot longer than expected. I thought we'd be building buildings that you could deconstruct already, and you know, I was hoping that our service would be in Ontario already. These things take time, and I have to remind myself that every day, the patience, but also the persistence. It's really easy to get knocked down and to give up, and it's extremely hard to just keep going. So the changes I want to see. We want to see deconstruction replace demolition as the industry standard, and I truly believe that that'll happen in the next decade. In Canada, US is a different story. Reclaimed materials becoming common in construction. So we see these a lot. Every cafe and restaurant in Vancouver pretty much is full of reclaimed wood, but seeing that in the residential sector and even in the commercial sector on a larger scale. And buildings designed for disassembly. So we need to start thinking about what happens with these buildings at the end of their lives. The buildings that we're building from pretty much 1980 until probably about 2025, these buildings we're not going to be able to deconstruct. So the houses being built today are not deconstructible. So that the houses from 100 years ago are much better candidates for us. We won't deconstruct anything past 1970. So the theme of my talk, it's not waste, it's just wasted. And please support the movement that we've started. We're the only company in Canada doing what we're doing. There's lots of people salvaging barns because they know it's worth a lot of money, but we're the only ones in the residential sector that are completely committed to deconstruction. And I want to thank some of my crew that's out here today because They're the ones every day out there getting their hands dirty. I joined them last week, and I couldn't feel my hands for about 5 days. So please, if you see an unbuilder out there in the crowd, give them a hug for me. Thank you.